and welcome to Policing TV. I'm Ben Twomey, your presenter, and I'm delighted to be joined by George Charlton, an old friend of mine. How are you, George?
Yes, very good, Ben. Thank you very much. It's a great sunny day in Durham, and I get to start the morning having a chat with you. So all good, man.
Lovely stuff. How I miss living in sunny Durham myself. So you train police officers and more. Tell us, what do you teach them?
Well, I suppose first and foremost that nice people take drugs. So I'm a passionate drug law reformer. I think I'm passionate about the role that policing can play in kind of being really progressive around the way in which we support people who use drugs. I travel up and down the country. Typically, it started out working with probationers, new cops. Where did I first start out? In Durham, probably like 18 years ago or something. And I recall kind of going in to do like a lived experience input. So I'm kind of somebody who's got a past experience of kind of drugs and alcohol and mental health and being locked up and in the prison system and stuff. So I would go in there to kind of educate cops to kind of look in the whites of the eyes of people who use drugs and kind of recognize that behind like every alcohol and drug problem is a person deserving of like love, compassion and support. It was really mad, man, when I used to start out doing it, right? It was like, I used to be physically sick with nerves because like you'd go into this lecture theatre and there'd be the custody sergeants or new cops, maybe 40 or 50 of them in a room, and everything inside you kind of goes, don't do it, because in order for people to kind of take anything from me, it kind of means that I've really got to open myself up to kind of be stigmatized in some ways, do you know what I mean? And kind of and talk about a group of individuals which aren't kind of necessarily favorite people of police, do you know what I mean? So it was always a kind of a really worrying thing for me. But then I suppose over the years, you know, I gained confidence. I think kind of the inputs were really impactful, really got cops to kind of recognize that, like, while their role is around policing, it's about thinking about those Pelian principles and the preservation of life and the duty of care and being proud to protect, you know, and kind of recognizing that people like me, people who use drugs, are definitely part of our community and people who should be cared for. So I've done loads of stuff across Lincolnshire Police and kind of Northumbria Police and West Midlands Police. I was recently last year down at Scotland Yard training 100 police drug expert witnesses. I've done a lot of stuff with the Drugs Expert Witness Evaluation Association. So I'm kind of definitely somebody who kind of wants to influence very early on in policing careers around probationers, because I think what I've noticed, Ben, is like many years ago when I started doing this stuff in Durham, right? Like I was younger than every cop I was teaching, right? Now when I'm doing it, like I'm older than every cop that I'm teaching, and I think we've got this next generation of police officers who are coming through, who are all young, who've grown up kind of in a time where people are maybe using substances recreationally. They're a little bit more liberal in their thinking. And I think what's really, really important is we can plant a seed early on in their career that isn't about like being like tough drug users and stuff like, because that approach doesn't work. Do you know what I mean? So I kind of feel really blessed and privileged to be able to do that work.
It's all changed, isn't it? But one of the fascinating things, we met 10 years ago, and neither of us has aged a day since then, George. So we're in good.
Well, I definitely. Well, this is like the eye candy podcast. Do you know what I mean?
That's exactly right. Yeah, you don't get this elsewhere.
Yeah.
So if I can take us back in time a bit, George, because I mean, you're talking about how weird it was and how nerve-wracking it was when you first started training police officers, and now you're a qualified trainer, you're a qualified counsellor. You've got more letters after your name than you've got in your name. Trust me, I counted. And you found yourself in this position, but it wasn't always that the journey you're on was going to take you here, because that, as I understand it, you left school at 15, no qualifications at all. Do you want to talk us through a bit about how you came on this journey?
Yeah, man. Yeah. Do you know what it is? I think for me, when I reflect back, you know, some people go, oh, school was the best years of my life and stuff. I wish I could get back. And for me, it was the worst years of my life. Like, I think when I remember back being a young kid, I've got this photograph of me sitting on a second-hand grifter when I'm 8 years old, right, on Christmas Day, and looking really happy. But I always remember how that little lad felt, and he kind of felt vulnerable and frightened and scared. And he lived in a house with lots of love, right? But I went to a junior school where they used to hit you with bamboo canes on your legs, and they used to hit you with rulers on your hands as punishments. And no kid were doing anything that deserved that, right? But that was a regular occurrence. And when they used to hit me, they hurt my hands, but they hurt my mind more, right? So like for a long period of time in junior school, there was threat for me all of the time. It was threat and worry, right? And and um and I used to get kind of bullied and picked on a lot. I had kind of the national health glasses on and terrible hair and it was just really tough, man, as a young guy growing up. Secondary school was no different, man. They used to beat the shit out of you with leather straps across your hands. They could hit you, man, like grown men and women taking the hands off you, right? And again, my life was consumed and wrapped up in fear. And I think for some boys in my school, it appeared getting the strap was like a badge of honor. You don't know what goes on for them behind in their own heads. You know what I mean? Maybe they were just projecting that, or the hard men and that. But definitely when I was getting hit better, then I was getting physically hurt, but I was getting psychologically hurt as well. And I think long before I ever took a drink or a drug, I had experienced physical abuse in schools. I'd experienced emotional abuse in schools. Before I went into senior school, I was sexually abused over a period of time by a priest. I'd never used a substance, man. Do you know what I mean? I had no intentions of being a drug user, but for me, it was like I had this thing that I needed to get out of school. And if I could just be a man, then everything was going to be okay. Do you know what I mean? So like I ended up leaving school with no qualifications and but a desire to join the army. I felt like I used to be in the army cadets, and if I put the army cadet uniform on, I used to almost become somebody different, and I was really good at that, man. I got a lance corporal stripe and a corporal stripe. Do you know what I mean? And I used to just found my place, found my place there. But I think like many people, like my age in the early mid 80s and stuff, we started messing around with drugs, you know, and kind of started using a bit of cannabis and cannabis was really good for me actually because it absolutely slowed my mind down. Definitely somebody who's got undiagnosed ADHD, I think. I think that's completely obvious. So kind of having a little smoke and stuff used to slow my mind down. Using alcohol used to kind of help me to lose my inhibitions. And rather than people laughing at us because they were taking the piss, they started laughing at us because I was quite funny. So I started getting like positive reinforcement and validation from my peer group, which I'd never had before. And of course, in the late 80s, in the late 80s, early 90s, people started using MDMA and other substances, and I kind of got involved in that whole kind of rave culture and had the best times, man. I'm not somebody who's going to sit and say, all drugs are bad, because in my experience, that wasn't the case. Do you know what I mean? I had some fantastic times, and but I ended up getting. I think the first time that I ever got into trouble with the police was probably when I was about 16 years old, and there had been a minibus accident, like it had crashed. Somebody was driving a van. I was in the van with a load of other lads. I left my wallet, and the police found my wallet, and inside the wallet was 2 joints worth of crack. And basically, the found the address, came and knocked on my dad's door, took us away in a car, 16-year-old, down the Kettlespeed police station at South Shields and grilled us about 2 joints worth of cash. You know what I mean? And it was like, so I ended up getting a portion, and that portion ended up sitting on my DBS for quite a while, actually. Do you know what I mean? But I think what that taught me very quickly was, it taught me a lesson, which was when you get your drugs, you use them quickly. Because if you won't bill get you, you're in the shit. You know what I mean? So like for me, it was a case of like, it taught me in some ways, not that I shouldn't use drugs, but it taught me to use substances in a really irresponsible way, in that you get them and you use them quickly. Do you know what I mean? So I kind of think that, so like the fast forward then kind of had some great times. It was all going well until it wasn't. And joined the military to try and get away from an amphetamine problem that I had. Stupidly, I took drugs with us and ended up getting caught. I was 21-year-old. I got sent to the Glass House in Colchester, military prison there for 2 years. And then I was chucked out and I came back to the northeast of England, feeling disgraced with myself, with a big, massive hole in my employment career. So when I tried to get other jobs, I couldn't get it because they were saying, well, where have you been? I said, I've been in the army. Well, why did you come out? I was like, can we get a reference of the army? Well, no, because they're not going to give us one, you know. And I started using drugs as a means of medicating low self-esteem, low self-worth, like just and ended up on that spiral, man, where I wasn't using drugs in a recreational way. I was using drugs for oblivion. And that kind of, my drug of choice became more, and it was more of anything I would get my hands on and using really irresponsibly and having conscious blackouts and police turning up and me being out of my mind and ending up being a frequent flyer in the police station, chopping myself open with razor blades. It was just just became like a really horrible place for many, many years. You know what I mean? And I ended up going came off a locked psychiatric unit in the year 2000 with stitches in my wrists. And I went straight into a residential rehabilitation centre in Sunderland for a year and stopped drinking, stopped using, but it was still a mess because alcohol and drugs weren't my problem. The way I was using them was, but for me, what we know, Ben, is that like for for young people who experience 4 or more adverse childhood experiences or traumas compared to a young person who experiences 1 or none, the kid who experiences 4 or more is 11 times more likely to use illegal drugs, is 11 times more likely to kind of end up in the prison system, is 7 times more likely to be involved in violent crime. So there's a real solid evidence base which suggests that young people who experience being hit like I was as a kid, being sexually abused like I was the kid, do you know what I mean? Having kind of violence around me which I witnessed as a kid is more than likely going to send you on this route to where I ended up. Do you know what I mean? And I think that was the start of my journey. I came out of rehab in the year 2000, kind of 2001, going, man, what am I going to do here? Because I remember this guy saying, George, don't worry, son, you only have to change one thing. And I thought, get in. And definitely change one thing. I said, what's that? He said, everything. I was like, no. And I guess for me, I ended up just going on this journey where I was frightened of being around people when I came out of the rehabs, and they were saying you've got like 12 weeks before you have to leave, so you need to start thinking about what you're going to do. I did a basic counselling course at Sunderland University, not because I wanted to be a counsellor, but I wanted to learn how to be around people. And I felt like as a group, they would go easy on me. And I remember after 12 weeks getting a certificate, this is to certify that George Charlton's completed a basic counselling course. And 2 things happened. The first thing, right, was like, I think it was the first thing in my life I'd ever started and finished. Do you know what I mean? It was like genuinely like I buzzed off that. But then the second thing, getting that certificate, I was like, now, like I got goosebumps. I thought, like, that's like snorting cocaine, that. So I thought there's only one thing to do, and that's do a level 2. So I did a level 2, a level 3, postgraduate diploma, went and got a degree, and then stayed on and got a master's at Durham. And for me, Ben, it was kind of like, I don't know, man, it was like, I live my life by this mantra that nothing happens to me, everything that happens for me. And whilst such a terrible experience, as did many around it, as did my parents and others, do you know what I mean? They were living with somebody who was really unwell, do you know what I mean? Come out the other side of it with a qualification that nobody wants. And if you want my qualification, then you've got to do a decade in the criminal justice system, you've got to do a decade in psychiatric units, you've got to do a decade with really bad mental health. But I will shut up. I think it's important to say that drug use does not imply drug addiction, right? And what we know is that 2 million people used an illegal drug last year in the UK. I think it's about 1 in every 11 people, 9% of people in the UK, adults, used an illegal drug. We don't have 3.2 million people in treatment because they don't have a problem with the drugs that they're taking. But the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crime reckon around 10 or 15% of people who use drugs globally do so because they experience pain and trauma through adverse childhood experiences. So my story isn't the norm, right? People using drugs and not ending up where I do, that's the norm. People like me who end up where I did, that's not the norm. But I think it's really important to recognize that because like we always hear this story about drugs and how bad they are, look at the state of people's lives, but we don't see the other side of the coin is which drugs are dangerous. I'm not suggesting that they're not, but the vast majority of people don't end up where I did.
Yeah, absolutely, George. Thank you so much for sharing so openly your story as well and your personal experiences. I think it's important that people can hear the not only the change that you've made, but also the relevance of the human story inside the statistics that you're talking about too. I wonder if we can just touch on that point about addiction and drug use and how they're not always the same thing, because there's a kind of school of thought, I suppose, in policing and in health, which would say addiction is something that needs to be treated. is something that it goes beyond a choice. Maybe people are starting to understand that it's not a rational choice that people are making, that choosing to break the law in that way. But you started this interview by saying how nice people take drugs too. So you've got the view that for lots of people, whether they're addicted or not, it doesn't change who they are as people.
No,
Why do you think that's important for police to hear?
well, because do you know what it be? But I think it's a bit like, because we've been conditioned to believe that people who take drugs are bad people. Do you know what I mean? But we haven't been conditioned to believe that people who drink alcohol are bad people. Do you know what I mean? And it's kind of like, we know that alcohol kills more people every year than all illegal drugs combined. Do you know what I mean? And there's been a really positive marketing job which has been done around alcohol, whereas there's been also been a really positive, negative marketing job which has been done around people who use drugs. So this idea of like zombies on our streets and jailed mum who tied up a junkie door, like these headlines that sit within the press, and those two things that I've just mentioned there, you know, like Britain's zombie drug epidemic. These are headlines in papers just in the last 6 months. Do you know what I mean? Now it seems to me like if that was written about any other demographic, or the LGBTQ plus community, or the Black Asian minority ethnic community, that would be seen as hate speech. Like it would be a hate crime. You wouldn't be allowed to write it. Whereas in the press and the media, they're writing that stuff every day. So then what that does is that filters down to kind of people in the local community who then have this idea that all people who take drugs are bad people. Do you know what I mean? But the reality is that when you kind of sort of connect with the lads and lasses who are on the street, my people, do you know what I mean? Like, and you talk to them, right? And you get behind the words behind the music, right? And you listen to their backstories. You go, man, no wonder you tried to find some form of comfort in using the substance. You know, I was on the Isle of Wight about 3 weeks ago. I did a little 5K run, 3 minutes in the air, 3 minute cold water dip in the sea. And then when I got out, I was working on it with NHS Inclusion, doing some peer-to-peer naloxone work. And getting out, I'm getting dried off. And I see this lad, he's sat overlooking the seaside. He's got a big hole in the side of his face here, and he's drinking out of a big bottle of iron brew. And there's no way there was iron brew. You know what I mean? And he caught my eye, I caught his eye. I said, all right, mate. He's like, aye, all right, mate. I said, aye. I said, do you want a fag like it? He's like, aye. So give him a fag. I sat and we had a little smoke together and just started talking. And I sat with that lad for 3 hours, and we watched never met him before in my life, watched the sunset together. He's looking at me like I'm mental, by the way, thinking, who the hell's this guy? Do you know what I mean? But we just talked, man. And he had been a veteran. He was kind of homeless. The hole in his face, he alleged, happened with his partner, had stabbed him in the face with a pair of scissors, that the police never took him seriously, and he was the one who was always told to leave, and they always favoured her because he's had a history in the past. You know what I mean? And I just feel, for me, it's like those kind of stories for both men and women across the UK, if we get to the words behind the music and we start to kind of recognise that not all, but not that nice people do take drugs, and there's different reasons for why people do what they do, whether that's medicinally, that they're using cannabis for medical purposes, whether that's because they're using cannabis because it makes them feel nice, they're taking MDMA or cocaine because they want to dance, or they're smoking crack cocaine or using heroin because they've been raped and traumatized. There's always a rationale and a reason as to why people do the things that they do. Now, obviously, some people who do take drugs are arseholes, but equally some people who drink alcohol are arseholes, and some people who do neither are arseholes. Do you know what I mean? It's one of those things, isn't it? But I guess for me, I just feel kind of really obligated to be open about my experiences in the hope that that's going to kind of influence and inform and shape not just police officers, but mental health workers and police and crime commissioners, authorities, directors of public health, whoever it is, right? I think that there's an opportunity to kind of, when we're really open and transparent about kind of where we've been, we touch people's hearts, and I absolutely think that that's how we shape and change policy. But definitely for me, I'm an advocate.
Can I ask, just related to that? So you talked about those different groups that you work with, and from what I've seen across police forces and across health teams, it's becoming more common to involve people who have used drugs in the past, who have been addicted in the past, to involve them into things. But you're talking more than that. You're talking about people that are currently using drugs, people that are currently in the throes of addictions, and relating to those people, trying to get them to co-produce your approach to helping them.
Totally, I think.
How hard is that? That could be quite intimidating, I think, for a police force to try and engage with.
Yeah, man. Well, and I think that's kind of part of what I do through my work, so through kind of my work at George Charlton Training and Consultancy Services, I think I've got kind of like, I've developed kind of quite a unique skill. I kind of sound like Liam Neeson there, don't I, from taking. I think for me, it's like, I've learned to have be able to have a foot in both camps and speak the language of both groups of people. So in some ways, like I'm able to kind of work strategically and speak strategically with cops and police and crime commissioners and others, but also I can be kind of down and dirty with the lads and lasses on the streets and then be able to bring them both together and help them to recognize that when you co-produce and work together, that the sky doesn't fall in. Do you know what I mean? Right. So because I think it's really important, like we hear a lot about lived experience and engaging and involving people with lived experience. But that creates like an image for me. If you've got lived experience, it's past tense, right? It's kind of like I've got lived experience of heroin use, but I don't have that experience anymore because I don't use. Well, actually, I do actually because because I take opiates. Do you know what I mean? I'm prescribed opiates for rheumatoid arthritis, so I'm still a heroin user, right? It's kind of it's just a more acceptable form of heroin because I get it off the doctor. Um, but the idea for me is engaging with lived and living experience. So people who've got current living experience of the issues being faced on the streets, they're best placed to be able to educate and inform a whole range of different people, including police officers. Do you know what I mean? And I think that it's magic, man. Do you know, like, I always remember taking this kid called Chris down to Lincolnshire Police. Jason Harwin was down there as he was deputy chief at the time, and we would go down and do every cohort. And I remember young Chris going down and he was so nervous, man, so nervous. Because you think about it, a drug user going into a room full of cops, because as much as cops can have a stigmatized attitude about us as people who use drugs, we also carry a bit of that towards them as well. Do you know what I mean? So for me, I kind of feel I've got to shake it out of both of them. Do you know what I mean? Just going, oh my God, it's going to be so difficult. I don't know, like, I feel sick and all that. And I said, you're going to be all right. We both had nice people take drugs t-shirts on. And he went in. And you know what, man? He was just amazing, man. Like, he stole the show. He was better than me. I thought, I'm not taking him again. But anyway, right? It was like, he put hearts in there. Do you know what I mean? He really did, because his story was just so impactful and so powerful. And I think, like, for me, right, it's about, we have to get rid of this, like, have to help officers to get rid of this facade, right? Like this, I want the mask to slip. You've got a job, right? Your job is around crime and prevention, but don't lose sight of who you are, because we have to bring heart into the job. Do you know what I mean? There's got to be heart that comes into the job. And I think that that's the beautiful opportunity that we have with new cops and using lived and living experience to inform that, is that the new cops are malleable and they're pliable, and providing they're getting that supervision of a cop who isn't an arsehole, do you know what I mean, a liberal-minded cop, then that's going to be really, really beneficial for this new generation of police officers who go out into the community, because they're able to connect at a human level with people who use drugs.
Yeah, there's so much in there that our audience will be taking away from that. And some people, it will sound like, common sense, and they'll understand completely what's happening. And for others, I'm sure there's some resistance because of the idea that, it's drilled into you about, your law enforcement. You're there to enforce the laws, and the laws sometimes contradict some of the things that you're saying.
But I think, Ben,
George,
sorry, go on.
Just because unfortunately we're running out of time. So if you want to make your last point, and I'd ask you actually, if you could have one message for police officers or police staff that are looking at this, if you'd have one message for them, what would that be?
Well, for me, it has to be this, doesn't it? Carrying naloxone, isn't it? So I think that what we know, to make a point about naloxone's a medication which is going to help help somebody experiencing an overdose to kind of breathe again and get emergency help support that they need. What we've seen over the past few years is a really positive movement from police forces across the UK. I think there's something around 18 police area commands now that have their cops carrying the intranasal stuff. It'll probably be this one, actually. Nixoid. I think there's the police officers have been responsible for reversing around over 300 drug-related deaths. Police Scotland have rolled it out across all of their plates. You've got the National Police Chiefs Council, Dr. Richard Lewis, Mark Lee, who's doing absolutely tireless work, man, to get cops carrying naloxone. I think for me, right, like this idea that you can't recover if you're dead's really important. And aside from locking people up, and you know what it is, Ben, I'm not down on police officers. I think cops do. I've got a lot of friends who are cops and a lot of cops who do really good work. But I think the thing for me is that remembering that the preservation of life, that Pelian principle, do you know what I mean? The protecting members of the community is like, if there's an opportunity within your police force to get your hands on naloxone and be able to carry it, I think that's something really fantastic. I'm only allowed to do this interview with you today because somebody used this and saved my life when I had issues around heroin. So I don't know, man. I just kind of like, thank you for the opportunity just to have a quick natter and a chat. If anyone wants to get in touch, talk about co-production or whatever, I'm sure you can get me details from Ben, or we'll have them somewhere on the podcast. But aye, man, nice people take drugs, innit? And look, drug users deserve love. We all do.
A really nice note to end on. And that point about naloxone, yeah, please do look into it if your police force doesn't have it. I've got a vested interest here because I wrote the naloxone policy for West Midlands Police when they became police force to carry naloxone. So it's symbolically important because it says that the preservation of life is the first duty, but it's practically important because it saves lives, including George's right here. So yeah, fully support that. So thank you so much for your time, George. For everyone that's watching, thank you for watching along. Please do get involved in the comments and share this video if you like it. We'll pop a link to George's work in the comments too. So if you like what he says, if you don't like what he says, get him over to your police force or to your area, and you can come and hear from it direct. So there you go. Thanks, George. Take care.
Cheers, Ben. Bye.